Hello and welcome back to the Hibs Observer with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin, ahead of Saturday's Premier Sports Cup quarter-final tie against Rangers at Ibrox. Ahead of this weekend's game, we're going to take a closer look at the composition of the Hibs side as it stands at the moment. And maybe kind of drill down into the details of a few specific positions. Those of you who have been reading the website will probably know where we're going with this. Patrick has written about it extensively already this week. So ahead of this weekend's cup tie, we're going to have a closer look at a couple of positions and see what could be the long-term solution moving forward for David Gray. Patrick, first things first, however, how are you getting on?
I'm very well, thank you, Liam. I think after a bit of I would call it a rollercoaster start to the campaign with European football and then an international break, domestic football on pause, kind of feels like we're getting back to something resembling consistency, a bit of a routine with the games, which is, I think, something we can all appreciate. So I know I'm saying that ahead of a cup tie at 5:45 p.m. on a Saturday, but I think after a bit of upheaval and a bit of the uncertainty of the Thursday-Sunday routine, it's nice to get back to something that we're a bit more familiar with, even though European adventures are always good fun. Back to the bread and butter now for us and for the team. So
back to reality. But I think the start of the season always takes on a wee bit of a sort of stop-start truncated feel, even when there's not Europe involved with these international breaks. And obviously the Cup comes into play as well. So it's sometimes it's not until like kind of October, November time it feels as if it gets into a proper flow. We are kind of creeping towards that now. Obviously, another international break to come. They're never too far away, are they? But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Just before we get started, obviously, a quick word as always for our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. So as I said, at the very top of the show there, you've been writing a wee bit this week, Patrick, about maybe kind of the most kind of intriguing question possibly at the moment in terms of team selection for Hibs. And it kind of, as I said, anybody who has not checked it out on the website, you can do that. And it's basically about, I think it goes a bit deeper than this, but the sort of crux of it is where is the best place to put Josh Mulligan in this team, and then that kind of has sort of knock-on effects, because I think it's been well established that he's one of those kind of dual position players. Mulligan, he even played up front, I think, at one point earlier in his career. So that could be a debate for further down the line, depending on how the season pans out. But for now, we'll keep it to he's played centre mid pretty much, the vast majority of his minutes so far, but he can also play at wing back. The debate then becomes, Hibs have a lot of options in the middle of the park. Plenty of players who can play in there. And Mulligan, I think, in his appearances out on the right, he's looked very effective there. But it's the kind of debate is the team better balanced with him in the middle or out wide? Who would need to play in the middle if Mulligan moves out to the right? So many questions, but we're going to attempt to tackle most, if not all of them. So, Patrick, if you can even try and sort of frame the debate, first of all, a wee bit better and a bit more concise than I have, it's an intriguing question, I think, isn't it?
It is, and I think I remember when we first talked about him signing Josh Mulligan, I was very much of the opinion that he would be coming in as an option at right wing back. I suppose largely to sort of challenge Chris Cadden in that position, in the same way that you had Nicky Cadden and Jordan Abita on the opposite flank. We know David Gray puts a lot of focus on having not just like a kind of starting 11 plus subs. He wants a full kind of playing squad. He wants players to be able to, start, to come in from the bench, to sort of impact the game in different ways. And I think, part of that was looking at how he played at Dundee last season. And it wasn't quite a sort of 50-50 split, but I think he made 32 starts for Dundee last season in all competitions, 16 of which came on the right of midfield in that kind of wing-back role, and 13 in the middle. So it was kind of based off that as well, where you just think he's played more often in the sort of right wing-back role, a similar a similar kind of system that Dundee were using to what Hibs have been using as well. And I think also, granted, he was playing more as a centre back towards the end of his time at Easter Road, but Lewis Miller's departure as well in the summer for Blackburn Rovers did sort of suggest that it might be an area in which Hibs would sort of need another body. And obviously Mulligan came in before Miller had gone, but there must have been a little bit of succession planning there, where you just think if Miller is likely to go, then we've got somebody here who can whilst they can't do right wing back and centre back, they can do right wing back and centre midfield. So you've got a dual position player. But I think I said this in the piece that I did earlier this week, that I think at the moment the sort of main factor behind Josh Mulligan playing in the middle of the park is really who else is available, and about trying to get that right blend in midfield. Like we saw it last season with Dylan Levitt and Nectar Triantis. And I'll come on to Triantis in a minute, because that's obviously a big part of this debate as well. But the two of them just seem to work really well, because Triantis was effectively doing the sort of things that Levitt wasn't. So the two dovetailed really well in midfield. We saw how much Triantis got around the pitch. He had that sort of box to box aspect to his game, but he was also quite good at sort of dropping deep, taking the ball off the centre backs. Not to say that Levitt can't do that as well, but I think if you were to pick a midfielder based on what they could give in terms of energy and work rate, that's not me saying Levitt is work shy, far from it. But I think you need to have the right combination in midfield, and I think the way that Triantis played and the way that Levitt played it just kind of gelled together quite well. And we saw David Gray try a lot of combinations in central midfield last year, both sort of pre-formation change and post-formation change, just depending on who was available, who was injured, who the opposition was, that sort of thing. And I think when you look at the start of this season, there was still maybe a little bit of doubt about Alassane Mane and how much he was going to play, whether he was ready to start. Joe Newell obviously injured and not really in the debate, and Miguel Chaiwa obviously coming in later in the transfer window. But prior to that, you would look at the midfield options, and obviously Jamie McGrath can play in there as well, but you wouldn't think, if you've got him in your team, you want him to be playing further forward. So it feels like a bit of a balancing act at the moment, and I think that's the big thing for me. And bringing in Dan Barlasser on transfer deadline day, a lot of people are a bit surprised that he maybe wasn't quite the number 6 destroyer type that I think a lot of people thought Hibs were after. But there's obviously a reason he's come in, and I think he has similarities to Levitt in his style of play, but I think he does also offer something different. And I just wonder whether like moves have been made with a view to eventually shifting Mulligan to right wing back, because I think at the moment, I mean, you know what you're getting with Chris Cadden. I think you're getting like an athletic player. He, his crossing maybe isn't always at the same level as his brothers, but he can put in some good crosses. He's played as a right back, so defensively he kind of knows what he's doing. But at the same time, I think that it's one of those where you want to have an option to be able to rotate at right wing back if you're still playing that system. And I think we've seen it a couple of times with Mulligan going to right wing back when Cadden comes off, bringing someone else into midfield. But I just sort of feel, I think we saw it once. I feel like it was the Kilmarnock game, possibly at Easter Road, where Mulligan started at right wing back. So we've seen him there a little bit, and we've sort of seen him there a couple of times in Europe. He was kind of moved out there, but I think he's got the ability to play out there, and I think he's got that. Defensively, he's, I think, quite strong. You're sort of comparing him to the league average last season for a sort of specially tailored kind of wing back role. He was sort of outperforming the league average in sort of few metrics. Otherwise, he was pretty much on a par. And comparing it with Chris Cadden as well, there were points where Chris Cadden came out on top, but there were probably more points where Josh Mulligan came out on top in that kind of right wing back role. So I suppose that the big debate here, and I've been talking for ages, so I will let you speak now. But I think the big debate here really is, I don't think there's any question over Mulligan being a good shout at right wing back. It's just whether or not Gray has the options, the combinations in midfield to allow Mulligan to move over without kind of weakening the middle of the park. And I think at the moment, with Newell out injured, obviously Alassane now has a hamstring problem, I think it is. And so we're not sure when he's going to be back. You've got Dan Barlasser still trying to get up to speed. So you do have options. You've got Miguel Chaiwa, who should be available this weekend after missing St Mirren game. So you do have Dundee United, not St Mirren, Dundee United. This is what I mean about being roller coaster. You start forgetting what games have been played and who the opposition was. So I think there are options for a different midfield. It's just whether or not they're the right kind of blend for what Gray wants from his midfield and from his team as a whole.
Yeah, I think you've summarised it very nicely there, to be honest. I think... I think you do make a good point coming back to last season as well. It did take a while, I think, for David Gray to find the right balance in midfield. I think when you look back to the start of the season, Levitt hardly featured at all. I think it took until Joe Newell getting injured and probably Kwon falling out of favour that really sort of gave Levitt the platform to come in, the opportunity, and then, as you say, he dovetailed so nicely with Triantis. There was such a such a nice balance of qualities in there, and it allowed Levitt to get on and do what he does best without. I certainly think the side of Levitt's game in terms of how to play that number 6 position defensively, in terms of positions to pick up, where to be to pick up second balls. David Gray, I think, specifically referenced that his sort of recovery running had improved. That obviously came with work on the training pitch. You could see a player who was developing, but I think we've always said that he's never going to be, the sort of destroyer type, the guy who's going to just be a spoiler, who's a real powerful, powerhouse presence in the middle of the park. It's just not his game, and I think to try and ask him to do that is almost then taken away from what he's really good at. So I think it is, I think, a case of, if you're going to play Levitt, then you do need somebody in there, as you say, who provides a sort of counterbalance, a bit more of a physical presence. And Mulligan so far has been the ideal option to do that. I think, with Chaiwa coming in a wee bit later, Barlaser now coming in, and obviously Junior still on his way back, you're going to have a lot of options in there once everybody's fit. And it does, to me, suggest that maybe there is scope for Mulligan to move out to right wing back. And I would like to see him get a run there, because it's not... I mean, he's been very good in midfield. Don't get me wrong, a couple of man-of-the-match performances in there, in Europe as well, no less. But to me, I think his sort of best quality is when he's got space in front of him to carry the ball. He's so good at driving forward with the ball, and you don't... I mean, it's not to say he doesn't get to do that in midfield, but I don't think you quite get to do it as often. And I think in the sort of relatively brief time periods where he has moved out to right wing back, I think maybe it's just me being a wee bit biased, because I think that's maybe where I'm talking myself into being that's where I'd like to see him. I think you've seen that a bit more, and I think that's so effective. And I think you need somebody who can do that on that side. It's not to say Chris Cadden can't do it, but I think, in terms of Mulligan, it is one of the strengths of his game. It's one of the things that really sticks out. And if you're going to play the sort of 3 at the back formation with wing backs, the wing backs are so important to the success. I think you've seen that with so many teams who go for this kind of system. You need them to do. I mean, it's probably the most demanding position on the pitch in terms of physicality. You need them to do a bit of absolutely everything. So I think, to me, I'm sort of leaning towards that as maybe where I'd like to see at least get a run, because I think you've got players in the middle who can, who again can provide a blend of qualities. Chaiwa's certainly suggested that, again, he's not going to be the sort of destroyer type. David Gray, when he spoke about him after the St Mirren game, I think it was the St Mirren game, that he's found him to be a bit more forward-thinking than a lot of people had maybe anticipated. But again, that doesn't mean he's certainly got that sort of biting quality in the middle of the park. He gets about, he covers ground. I think you saw that in his debut against Livingston. It's I think that sometimes the concern with guys coming into the Scottish Premiership, who haven't experienced it before, is how do they cope with that side of it? And he looked, far less just coping with it. He looked as if he really enjoyed that. So I think, as time moves on and guys get opportunities to settle, I think you might see Mulligan moved out there, because especially I think Chaiwa has certainly suggested that once he gets up to speed, once he's got a proper run of games, that he could be real difference maker in there. But it's just, again, I think it's a case of maybe time will tell, and it's probably, I think, like we saw last season, when it does take a bit of time for it to fully settle and who plays where. Once we start getting this sort of, uninterrupted run of fixtures and guys get proper minutes, I think that's when we'll probably really see it start to take shape. So I don't know. I mean, do you think, in terms of Mulligan moving out there, do you think it will be a case of, sort of figuring out first what the right balance is there in the middle without him? How do you maybe see it panning out?
Yeah, I think one of the main things I said in the piece was that regardless of whether Gray sees right wing back as Mulligan's kind of primary position, and we spoke to Mulligan in the summer when we were at the training camp in the Netherlands, and you're never going to really, like, 9 times out of 10, I don't think you get a straight answer from a player if you say, like, what's your preferred position. They're not going to say, oh, I really like playing as like a number 8, or I really like playing as an inverted wing back. It's always just the kind of stock answer of, I'll play anywhere the manager wants to play me. I'm just interested in starting and doing my best for the team. And Mulligan was no different. He just said, well, I'm comfortable playing in either role, as in central midfield or right wing back. So there wasn't any sort of push from him to be like, I really want to be playing out there. It was just very much like, I'll do the job that's asked of me. But I think at the moment, like, the issue is, so if you've got everyone's fit and available, obviously they're not at the moment. So Newell is still working his way back. Alisson is out injured at the moment. And that leaves you really with Dylan Levitt, Josh Mulligan, Miguel Shaiwa, Dan Berlasser, and I suppose to a lesser extent, Jamie McGrath, Josh Campbell, who can play there, but you probably wouldn't want them playing there if you could help it. So I think that the concern for me is that from those who are available, I think a lot comes down to, like, David Gray talks a lot about character. He talks a lot about players communicating, and I suppose it boils down to it's easy to forget. I think that Chai was still only 21. He plays like a player with a lot more maturity. He's still got his moments, but I think it sort of depends on, do you have somebody next to him in the midfield who won't be afraid to sort of shout at him or ball him out if he does something wrong, if he makes a mistake, or just sort of like talking him through the game almost. Like, a lot of people would say he doesn't need that, but I think, it certainly sometimes can be helpful when you've got somebody saying, pick up that man, sort of like move into that space. And I think it's just to use the kind of Jack Iredale, Rocky Bashiri example, where the two of them get on very well off the pitch, but on the pitch they're not afraid to kind of shout and holler at each other if one of them's doing something wrong. I think you need to have players in the middle of the park, especially who can do that, who aren't afraid to kind of shout at each other, aren't afraid to tell each other where to go. The communication's got to be right. So I think it's really, I suppose, does Levitt have that sort of those sort of qualities where, because we've seen this before with some players, maybe captain a team, and when they're captaining the team, their influence is maybe kind of diminished because they feel they've got this extra responsibility. Some players thrive on having the armband. Some players, seem to fare better without it. But I suppose it comes down to, whoever the two midfielders are in the middle, like, can they play well together? Can they communicate with each other? Will they, will they be the right blend in the middle of the park? And, that's what you look at Barlasser, and he's only just come in. He's not played an awful lot of football. His substitute appearance against Dundee United was the first competitive minutes he's played since last season. So, we know that David Gray is not the kind of gung-ho type. He doesn't like taking risks. So, I think a lot of people saying, Mulligan should start at right wing back and the midfield should be Chaiwa and Barlasser at Ibrox. It's a little bit. It's a bold call. I mean, I would be very surprised if we see that exact midfield combination, for example. I personally like Chaiwa. I think he's got a lot of qualities in there. I think he needs to have the right sort of person next to him. And again, a lot depends on the opposition as well. If you're playing a team that's sort of got a sort of similar system, if you like, when you look at Dundee United last weekend, what was really noticeable for me was how much Dundee United won the midfield battle at times. Some really good players in there, the likes of Kamara, who I think I can't remember if it was one of his teammates or whether it was Jim Goodwin or somebody else entirely. I could be getting completely confused here, but it did sort of suggest that it was kind of like having two players in there, which is exactly what I thought watching him. Just really really impressive player. Really getting about the pitch, and it's just sort of having someone who can do that, but also having somebody who can kind of put the foot in the ball, control things a little bit. And I think when you look at the midfielders who Hibs have got, the central midfielders, like there's a lot in there. A lot of different qualities. There's similarities as well, but it is an interesting blend, and I feel like we're almost getting back to that stage that we had a couple of seasons back, where Hibs had a lot of midfielders who were probably too similar. And whilst I don't think the current crop of midfielders are too similar, I think there's a danger that you could end up getting the wrong combination, depending on who plays there. And I don't think that's something David Gray's going to do, because we saw that last season. I mean, it's mad to me to think that the starting central midfielders, obviously, I think it was a kind of 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 kind of thing. But Nathan Mariah-Welsh and Joe Newell started the first game of the season last year. And then, you look at the other combinations you had, I think we had Newell and Triantis, we had Levitt and Triantis, we had Kwon in there a couple of times. I think when you looked at the number of combinations they had in the middle of the park, it was sort of like creeping towards double figures, which is, quite mad when you think about it. When you want to have like a settled team, you want to have, consistency. Obviously, some games call for different, different approaches. They call maybe for different combinations in there. But I think it's difficult at the moment. It feels a little bit like with Newell injured and Alisana out injured at the moment, and Barlaser still coming up to speed. It really is going to be a case of like who can play how many minutes, and who's in a position to start, and who maybe is in a position to come off the bench. So I think that's why we've seen Jamie McGrath dropping deeper a few times. It's why we've kind of seen Josh Campbell coming in there, and this kind of this sort of little tweak from the 3-5-2 or the 3-4-1-2, this sort of like 3-4-2-1 or 5-2-2-1, whatever you want to call it, which hasn't been going down very well with the fans. But it feels a little bit like, and it's something that we can probably ask David Gray actually at some point, just about that midfield blend, and if he feels that it's almost kind of like not patchwork at the moment, but it's if you've got everyone available, then I think that gives you more options in the middle of the park, and I think that's probably a headache that he would like to have. He talks about having his nice headaches, and I think that's one that he would like to have. At the moment, he probably doesn't, and I think it's more a kind of juggling act at the moment to think, how can we put players in there who are going to protect the defence, who are going to start attacks, and just really kind of compete well against their opposite numbers in games. And I mentioned Triantis earlier. I do think that part of it is potentially that everyone saw how much improvement there was in Triantis' game, not just from moving from centre back into midfield, but just from the start of the season to the end. I mean, there was a reason that he was nominated for the kind of season awards. There's a reason why there was quite a lot of interest in him in the summer from various teams, and why Hibs are so keen to get him back. That it's almost at times that he would just. I talked about Kamara in the Dundee United team, and just sort of that role, almost being able to play two players instead of one. I think Triantis was like that at times, and I think that I'm not saying that Hibs relied on him, but I think having him there and like his fitness and suspension, I think he was suspended for maybe one game. Fitness wise, he was virtually available for the entire season, and just having him there meant that you didn't really have to think about it. It was kind of Triantis and one other. And I think we saw Gray kind of tweak that for certain games, in a bid to try and get on top of the opposition, and a bid to sort of, change things up and stuff. So I think it is at the moment, I think it still almost feels a bit like they're attempting to find a combination of midfield that works. And it's almost like, I think Mulligan comes into that conversation at the moment because of the qualities he has. Very athletic, very kind of box to box. I think it was a few games ago, you had, people lightning it with John McGinn, which felt premature, but it wasn't. I think it was a bit sort of tongue in cheek, and it's like, they share the same initials, that sort of thing. But you can kind of see where they're coming from, just with that sort of that determination to get on the ball, to drive forward, to make things happen. But you made a very good point where you say, that's equally something that you can use in right wing back. And I think when you look at his defensive stats last season for Dundee, a team that finished, I think, 10th in the end. it's one of those where Hibs have been good at this in previous seasons, or years gone by, when they've picked up players from sort of either lower league or teams that are further down the Premiership. They've taken players on and they've kind of given them a platform to improve, and they can kick on. And I feel that's what we should be seeing with Mulligan. And whether that's in central midfield, whether it's at right wing back, remains to be seen. But I think in terms of like his all round qualities, I think right wing back is such a sort of perfect fit for him. But at the moment, it almost feels like, if they can't get the central midfield blend right without Mulligan in there, then that's going to create problems. So I think until Gray and the coaching staff are able to, I suppose, identify a combination in midfield that doesn't include Mulligan that works from the fit and available players, then it feels like he's kind of going to continue there for the time being, possibly sort of moving out for sort of 15-20 minutes in the second half of games, things like that. But I think it's I would like to see him get an extended run there. I have felt at times that the midfield is missing something when he's been moved out to right wing back. So I suppose it's really about kind of juggling. Do you want his presence in midfield? Do you want him in the wing back role? Do you even want him playing as a kind of inverted wing back where he's sort of coming inside rather than hitting the byline and crossing it? So I think there's a lot of options there, but I think crucially the big thing for me is being able to find a combination in central midfield that doesn't involve Mulligan and isn't going to kind of weaken the team or sort of affect the spine of the starting 11. And I think at the moment with injuries and things like that, I think that's almost being it's kind of almost forcing their hand. So it does maybe feel like something we might see happening a bit more further down the line. I guess it's a case of time will tell, but there's no doubt Mulligan can play in central midfield and play well, but you want your strongest team available in every position, and I think I do think I'd like to see him get a run of games there, just see what he can do. He scored a couple of goals already for Hibs. He didn't score any goals for Dundee last season. I don't think. It was five assists, 4 of which came from wing back. So you can see the sort of attacking output there, and you can see the defensive qualities as well in terms of his sort of tackles and interceptions and things like that. So it fits the bill. It's just whether or not Hibs are in a position to be able to move them out there just yet.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said this is very much a case of time will tell. Because I think when you do have options, it is inherently a positive, but then the kind of side effect of that sometimes is it can take a wee bit of time to figure out best how to combine all those options. And I think that's maybe what we might see a wee bit of, at least for the next wee while. But as you say, time will tell. For now, folks, we are going to leave it there. If you want to read about this in a wee bit more detail, as we've referenced throughout, Patrick did write on the website about this very issue. Our subscribers can read that on there just now. If you're not currently a subscriber to the website, it's currently £1 for 6 months of full access to all our Hibs journalism. If you sign up just now, actually, you will also be in with the opportunity of winning a ball signed by the Hibs first team squad. So there's that incentive there for you as well, a wee collector's item, and you can find full details of that on our social channels, the link to enter, the link to subscribe. Existing subscribers can also get involved with that competition as well, so do check that out. But for now, folks, thank you as always for joining us, and do join us across the weekend as we provide our usual coverage of a huge game for Hibs, chance to get back to Hampden Premier Sports Cup quarter-final against Rangers at Ibrox. We'll be there, and we'll see you across the weekend. So take care, and we'll speak to you soon. Cheers.